started here. Thanks everyone again for being with us today. My name is Rob Watson, and I'm the Deputy Director of the EdRedesign Lab at Harvard Graduate School of Education. I also am a lecturer here at the school. And we're thrilled to be here for today's webinar on the recently released EdRedesign case study on the transformational work of the Mission Economic Development Agency in San Francisco. The topic of today's discussion will be the content of the case study entitled Leading Through Partnership, how the Mission Economic Development Agency built a community-driven prenatal-to-career model. As you sign on, please, as Michelle is teeing up in the chat, feel free to introduce yourself and let us know where you're tuning in from. And we'll go to the next slide. In terms of just our run of show for today, I'm going to say a quick word just about the work of the EdRedesign Lab and what we do and why we think the work of MEDA embodies our view on how to create equity for youth and families. We'll have my colleague Lynn Sachs, our research director, speak to some of the highlights from the recently released case study, and we'll also be sure to put that case study in the chat for those of you who may have not seen it. And then we're going to open up into a panel discussion with my colleagues Luis, Jillian, and Richard, the star-studded group here, to talk about the work of MEDA and all the things they've done over the years. So with that, we'll jump in here. And then just here quickly, I'll just say this is our panel. They'll each introduce themselves a bit later, but we're joined by Luis Granados, Chief Executive Officer of the Mission Economic Development Agency, MEDA for short, Jillian Spindle, Chief Strategy and Advancement Officer, and Richard Raya, who's a Senior Advisor to MEDA, and also is with us as an EdRedesign by all means Senior Fellow this academic year. Next slide. And Lynn Sachs, our Research Director as well. So just a quick word about EdRedesign. We are a center based at the Harvard Graduate School of Education with a big vision around creating opportunity for all children and youth. And we really are motivated by the idea that to create a more just society, we have to create clear and accessible pathways to well-being, educational attainment, civic engagement, and upward mobility for young people across the U.S. Next slide. In terms of what motivates us, we know that our country has deep, persistent inequalities where race, place, and income continue to be determinants of what happens to you later in life. To the left, you see a graph many of you have probably seen that shows that we have declining rates of intergenerational mobility in the U.S., the extent to which a child earns more in adulthood than their parents, essentially the American dream, or rising to the middle class. Someone who was born in a little after World War II in the 1940s had about a 90% chance to earn more than their parents. Someone born in the 80s, it's about a 50% chance. So we know that there's deep disparities in how that happens, and we know where you grow up, the neighborhood in which you live has a lot to do in terms of what opportunities you have later on in life. And we also know that there's inequitable opportunity in our education system. To the right, you see a graph of every public school district in the United States. On the x-axis, parent socioeconomic status. On the right, how many grade levels are not, above or beyond an incoming sixth grader is. And we know that on average in this country, socioeconomic status remains a leading determinant of how well you do in school. And so we're deeply motivated by racial, geographic, and socioeconomic disparities that impact what happens to young people in school and in life. Next slide. So there's two kind of core ways we think communities and in the country need to think about what it means to create a more equitable society for all. We believe you have to have place-based cross-sector collaboration strategies that bring together community leaders, institutions from the public and private sector, nonprofits, government, business community, philanthropy, to establish a common vision for young people and families from prenatal to career. But we also need to have personalized relationship-based supports. We need to ensure that every child is seen and known, that they have a caring adult in their life that accompanies them on that journey and can connect them to the broader ecosystem of supports and opportunities in their community. We think the work of the Mission Economic Development Agency really embodies these two pillars of work, and we're really excited to hear from them directly today on the infrastructure and the transformational model they've built over the last several decades. We think it's some of the most compelling work in the entire country. Next slide. So as you see here again, these are just what I teed up, our belief around place-based cross-sector collaboration, having some sort of backbone or intermediary organization at the local level, in this case, looking at the neighborhood level, to really organize all of the different institutions that support young people and families, or should, and then twinning that strategy with a more personalized support system to engage young people and their families. Next slide. Just to close out EdRedesign, we work with a large number of communities across the U.S., over 40 plus each year through our communities of practice and our national convenings. We have two communities of practice we run by all means in our Institute for Success Planning. The Mission Economic Development Agency is a part of our Institute for Success Planning. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Lynn Sachs to jump right in to the case that her and our colleague Michelle Sadaka wrote about the work in the Mission District. So we'll let you take it away, Lynn, and then once she's finished, we'll jump into our panel discussion with our colleagues from MEDA. Thanks everyone again for being here.
Thank you, Rob. I'm so thrilled to be here to have a chance to share a little bit about the case study that Michelle and I wrote. And of course, to give you a chance to hear from our panel of leaders from MEDA, because you know, part of our goal here is to share best practice, and part of our goal is to help you understand how to do it. That's one of the core values that we have at EdRedesign. And so I just want to frame this by saying researching and writing this case felt truly like a labor of love. It was an amazing experience to get to visit and talk with people who are leading the work, people who are part of the community, you know, and just to have a chance to really see what transformational place-based work can look like. I know so many of us find this strategy compelling and are looking for examples of what it can really look like, especially when we're earlier in the process. And MEDA really has, you know, has the staying power and the vision and the implementation strategies to serve as an incredible example of what this can be, you know, when we have all the pieces together. You know, it's just incredible to be able to see how community driven it is, and then what the impact has been back on the community. Next slide, please. And one of the points that we want to make that, you know, that Richard, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, has made is that this should not be the exception to the rule. You know, a quote that's from the case, and, you know, that we've heard Richard say before, is that this type of transformational and community-led initiative should not be a boutique one-off, but rather the normal way we come together as a society to align systems, fight poverty, and reverse legacies of inequity. What we're really aiming for here is a whole new way of doing business and thinking about governance and thinking about what communities look like and what they need to thrive. Next slide. So, you know, one of the goals, as I said, for EdRedesign is to identify and disseminate best practice examples. So bright spots, and not just understand what it looks like when it's somewhat baked and finished, but what it takes to get this done. You know, what are the pieces that need to be put in place? What are the leadership strategies? You know, what are both the practical and the, you know, the visionary elements of doing this work? And so we researched and we wrote this case in order to share with, you know, much broader audience what it looks like and how to get it done. MEDA and the Mission Promise neighborhood, you know, which are based in the historically Latino Mission District in San Francisco, have built an intersecting set of interventions to empower and to stabilize the Latino community there. And what we aim to do with the case is to help community leaders and policymakers and practitioners understand what the infrastructure and the impact, and then how to replicate some of those core practices locally. Next. And what we were able to do is, you know, visit the Mission District to see what it is like, you know, to be actually physically in the mission. You know, we're talking about place-based work, and the tangible feel of the place really matters. We were able to conduct interviews with MPN and MEDA leaders and staff, with numerous community partners, and to conduct focus groups with families, with family success coaches and with the promotors who are community workers. And I just want to thank, those who are on the call and also numerous people on our own staff. It was truly a team effort. So we appreciate so much all the time and thoughtfulness that people put into the interviews and willingness to share so many aspects of what you're doing on the ground. So, both on our own team and on MEDA and MPN's team, this was very much a group effort to create this case. So we appreciate that greatly. And just, while I'm talking about the site visits, I just want to give you a little bit of a feel for, what it means to truly be a place-based organization that's focused on strategies for the community. Because one aspect of MEDA that's hard to see from the outside is the fact that it owns its own building. It's really, the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of MEDA matters a lot. It's right there in the heart of the community. When you walk into the building on the first floor is a series of small businesses, and MEDA serves as an incubator for those. And some of them have then been able to move out of the MEDA building into their own brick and mortar spaces. So there's that aspect. There's, community meeting space on the first floor. It has a very convivial, very vibrant feel to it with murals on the walls. And then there are classroom spaces. There might be, people meeting there for a class or a training. And the offices of the staff are also within the same building. So there's just an incredibly vibrant interaction and deep connection with the community right in that space. Next. There are about 58,000 people who live in the mission. And one thing to note on this pie chart is that it's currently about 35% Latino. That's a reduction from historical levels. And one of the goals of MEDA and MPN is to stabilize the Latino population in the community. So as you'll see in a few minutes, housing is part of the strategy because gentrification has reduce the number of Latino residents of the mission. And that's something that, that MEDA has taken on as one of its core goals. Next. So the organization itself has been celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's more than 50 years old since it originated, and its goal is to build Latino prosperity, community ownership, and civic power. It started, really with that initial focus on small business development and economic stability and thriving, and it expanded through a number of partnerships and developing more of its own programming to a whole host of strategies and interventions. That includes access to stable housing, affordable childcare, after-school programs, mental health support, small business loans. So you can see just the vast range of supports and opportunities that MEDA offers. And one of the things that's really notable, the more you get to know about MEDA and MPN strategy, is how intersecting these pieces are. So they don't just all sit next to each other. We talk a lot about siloing, and the more I learned about MEDA, the more it was clear that this is the opposite of siloing, because each piece helps to feed each other. There are very intentional intersections and partnerships and really thoughtful ways of of meeting and planning and strategizing together. That means that there's just such a an incredibly seamless, I think, often for the residents, intersection between the different elements. Next slide. So after MEDA had already been in operation for quite some time, in 2013, they received a Federal Promise Neighborhoods Planning and Implementation Grant, which enabled them to launch Mission Promise Neighborhood. For those of you who are familiar with Promise Neighborhoods, it is a federally funded program that gives initial funding for 5 years and then some opportunities for continuing funding after that. And this really transformed what MEDA was able to accomplish, just because of the vast additional amount of funding and also the infrastructure support that came with it. So MEDA then continued its strategy of partnering closely with community members and community organizations to think about what would it really mean to be focused more specifically on children within the community and what were the greatest needs of the community. So as they had done with other programming previously, the first thing they did was get community members together to understand, what the greatest needs were. And one of the things they heard was that housing was one of the greatest needs. So, the residents felt that unstable housing was having a negative impact, not just on them, but on their children. And that for children to thrive, it was important to build in this stable foundation of housing. We're not going to talk about housing too much today, but I hope you'll read the case and see just how much they did lean into the housing aspect, because that has, that's transformed many lives in the mission, and is a great example of how they listened to the community and then took that information to go, even in a different direction they were initially intending to be responsive. Next. And so, the strategies focus on affordable housing, family success coaches who are embedded in schools and support families across the cradle-to-career continuum, and also help to build in additional data capacity and infrastructure. Next. And, one of the truly remarkable elements of MEDA for those of us, I've had a chance to either visit or to hear from those who are working, is the extent to which every strategy is deeply guided by the community and its needs at every stage. So there are promotores who are community workers who are embedded in many of the efforts. There's a very deliberate effort to cultivate talent from within the community, to train parents and families to be advocates, and to collect data that's relevant to the community, and then to ensure that it's shared back with the community as well. Next. I'm not going to read this now, but there's a powerful story in the case of Dr. Johanna Quiros, who started her relationship with MEDA as a client and is now the chief operating officer of one of the key partner organizations. And to me, this just demonstrates perfectly, MEDA's strategy of lifting up members of the community and helping people get to leadership roles. Next. In addition to the personal stories that are so incredibly compelling, there's quantitative evidence of the difference that this strategy has made. So as you can see on this slide and the next, there are tangible improvements in everything from early childhood readiness to high school graduation, and just to, the availability of affordable housing for residents of the mission. Next. And just a couple of other quick things I want to touch on. Once MEDA had its strategy, really clearly in place as a model, they wanted to share it out more broadly with others. So they've been working on building not just a promised neighborhood within that one community, but a whole promised city within San Francisco by expanding to additional neighborhoods. They've also built an Equitable Recovery Institute, a statewide California Promised Neighborhoods Network, which has promised neighborhoods from across the state, banding together on policy and on strategy, and even national partnerships and advocacy. Next. Next slide. And just two quick things I wanted to highlight on these 10 takeaways for place-based leaders. One is have an audacious vision, and the other is blending direct services with capacity building and infrastructure, because in some ways they represent two different ends of the continuum, and yet each one is so important. What's remarkable in talking to the leaders, and you'll hear from them in just a minute, is how bold their vision is and how ambitious it is for their community. And yet they understand that having the vision without the infrastructure to support it won't be sustainable. So they've managed to build those two things together in support of the community, to create really an entirely different way of doing business in the Mission District. And so with that, I just want to turn it over back to Rob and to our MEDA leaders, who will have a panel discussion and share more of their leadership insights.
Thanks, Lynn. great opening and really appreciate setting the stage that way. And I'm going to ask our team members to put once again in the chat the link to the case study for those who signed on a bit late, just to have access to the written material. And I should note it's in English and Spanish, so we're really excited to have it in multiple languages. We're gonna jump right in here with Luis, Jillian, and Richard. I'm gonna adjust the script slightly, guys, and just jump right in with kind of 3 questions for you round robin, because I want us to get through a few things. So I'm gonna ask Luis, then Jillian, then Richard to all introduce yourselves and to talk a bit about your involvement with MEDA in the Mission Promise neighborhood. And I think it would be great for you each to talk about kind of when you got involved with MEDA and what the state of affairs were when you got involved and what it led to. And then also, if you could say a word in your opening remarks about community partnership. What does that mean for you at both the individual and organizational levels? And then what are the skills and strategies that you've seen that have been critical to leading this cross-sector place-based work? So again, just would love for you to introduce yourself, your trajectory at the organization, what community partnership looks like at the individual and organizational level, and the kind of skills and strategies that are critical for this work. So I'm going to start with the fearless leader of MEDA, Luis. We'll start with you and then go to Jillian and Richard.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Luis Granados. I'm MEDA's CEO and have been with the organization for about 25 years. During my tenure, MEDA has grown from a service organization of 4 staff, a 300,000 operational budget, and serving about 100 people per year. That was back 25 years ago. Today, we are a backbone organization for the neighborhood, have an integrated set of asset development services, are an affordable housing developer with over 2,500 units in our portfolio, and are a community development financial institution who lends to small businesses. Plus, we are engaged in policy and advocacy efforts. Currently, we have over 100 employees, 21 million operational budget, and serve nearly 20,000 people on a yearly basis. My involvement with Mission Promise Neighborhoods was since its inception, when we advocated to be able to apply for this opportunity. Also, I was part of bringing our community together around this concept of a promised neighborhood. And then, was really involved in helping to create a vision for what could be, or what this could mean for our community. Rob, do you want me to go into what community vision, or should I let Jillian and Richard introduce themselves first?
You can continue, and then we'll have them introduce themselves.
All right. I think for me, like, what does community partnership and empowerment look like? I'm going to mention 3 things. I think it starts with a strong collective vision for what the partnership is seeking to create for community. How do we put community members at the center of this strategy? And a vision that is inspiring to keep partners and our constituents engaged and present throughout this process. I also think that having a common set of strategies that are reinforced across the various partners is really, really important. The interaction between the partners on the strategies, I think, is also very meaningful. The other one that is should be very common sense. It's ongoing and strong communication and interaction between partners and communities that allow for strategies to be adjusted, for people to talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So I think communication has been kind of at the center of the work that we've done. Again, in terms of the skills that are required, I think the ability to connect a compelling vision to strategies that advance that vision and acting on those strategies, I think is really important. So again, connecting vision to strategies to action, really, really important. The ability to measure results. We all intend to do good things, but are we really, really achieving those results? And I think we have to measure if it's actually adding value to our constituents. And then I'll just leave it at the last one, and I think I talked about it a little bit already. I think it's the audacity to envision what could be possible, and to not take no for an answer. Along this path of Promised Neighborhood and the things that we've done, I think we've brought people along this strong, compelling vision. And along the way, we've had to address we got a lot of no's along the way. And we're pretty persistent, and we did not take no for an answer. And I'm really thankful for Jillian and Richard to have been part of that audacity. So I'll just leave it at that, Rob.
Thanks so much, Luis. And we'll go to you, Jillian, if you want to introduce yourself and your work, talk a bit about community partnership and cross-sector leadership skills.
Sure thing. Thank you. So I am Jillian Spindle, and I'm the Chief Strategy and Advancement Officer at MEDA. Actually just had my 15th year anniversary this month. So as far as what MEDA was like when I started, we were a really different organization. We had 16 staff. We had our business program, our housing counseling program, and our policy advocacy program. So I've been part of MEDA's growth trajectory and, contributing to it along with Luis over this past 15 years, Luis and everyone else who's been part of our efforts. As far as Mission Promised Neighborhood, I was at the time our development director when we decided to apply. So I was in the middle of everyone involved. My job was to really listen and consolidate all the ideas from community, from partners, from the city, from the school district, and be able to craft those into a story and a plan for the mission to bring to the federal government and apply. It's a huge honor. I can't believe how far we've come since then. And it's really just become more than any of us had ever envisioned. So as far as what community partnerships, what they mean to me, I think what came to mind immediately was just listening. Being a good partner is about really listening and understanding where we all fit in, where we can contribute, what are those intersections of our work. I think it requires being humble and having a lot of humility and respecting each other's contributions. And it also takes a lot of patience, right? This work is very messy and it takes time. And so having the patience to work through some of the challenges together is really important. As far as leadership skills for this work, I think something that came to mind immediately was creativity. I believe that it does take a lot of creativity to really think through how you can collaborate across sectors, how you can bring folks together, how you can move things forward. Relationship building is everything, just really real authentic relationships, being able to call, text, however it is, you need to just have that conversation and make something happen and communicate really well. So those are some of the immediate things that came to mind for me.
Thanks, Jillian, and we'll go to Richard.
Thanks, Rob, and I want to thank Lynn just for that wonderful introduction. It's always different. It always hits different to hear your story from someone outside of the organization. So thank you, Lynn, for capturing that information and sharing that. I'm Richard Raya. I joined Luis and Jillian about 6.5 years ago to become the director of the Mission Promised Neighborhood at MEDA. But my journey began when I was a kid. I grew up in a family living in deep poverty. My parents had been farm workers as children in Northern California. And I was a high school dropout because we moved around so much. And when I did eventually make it to the University of California, Berkeley for both my bachelor's and master's, I knew that my goal was to build a more supportive system for children and families like mine. So I worked in government for over a decade and just became increasingly disappointed with kind of the siloed nature of government, the lack of accountability to results, the lack of collaboration with the community and with community partners. And it's not to say that there aren't great things happening in government, but I didn't see the level of collaboration and accountability and the proximity to community that I was looking for. It was around that time that I heard of the Harlem Children's Zone. and was like, yes, this is what I needed when I was a kid. This is what my family needed. We needed someone to see us along that cradle to career journey, to be there from birth all the way through high school and beyond, providing the wraparound support services for us to do well. And I heard of President Obama's Promise Neighborhood program, and which was attempting to scale what the Harlem Children's Zone had created. And so it was with all of that kind of knowledge and desire that I approached, that I joined MEDA and became the director of Mission Promise Neighborhood. When I joined, I was ecstatic to see everything that I had wished for in a collaborative approach, based at the community level, collaborating with the school district and the city, holding itself accountable to results. But we were faced with a pretty big challenge when I got there, in that our federal grant was sunsetting. So as most of you may know, the Promise Neighborhood grant only lasts for 5 years. It's a large grant, it's $30 million. You build a lot of infrastructure and relationships. But then you're faced with the situation of a large amount of money just disappearing. So a fiscal cliff, as we like to say. So one of my primary roles was to figure out, how do we sustain this incredible work that was happening in the neighborhood. So working with Luis and Jillian and our community partners and the families that we work with, we were able to make the case for the city of San Francisco, for the state of California, for philanthropy to invest in a big way in continuing this very important neighborhood infrastructure that we'd built. And then to get to your question around partnerships, I do think that what I find to be not even the secret sauce, but one of the main ingredients is a structured collaborative process. And so what we use results-based accountability, which is pretty common in the Promise Neighborhood world and in the Cradle to Career world, but just a structured way of bringing different stakeholders together to align around common outcomes, to identify mutually reinforcing activities, to measure those results, and keep each other accountable. I just think that there are so many moving parts to this work that you need to have one core thing that keeps everybody aligned. And I found that to be RBA. And then just to echo what others have said, there has to be tons of communication and transparency and trust. I think the last thing that I would add around this is really recognizing the value of place, the place that we as partners share, the community, the neighborhood, and honoring that, valuing that, and drawing strength from that. I think that's a big part of the success story for initiatives like this.
Thanks for that opening from all of you. And Richard, I'm going to come back to you. I'd love, in the case you talk about MEDA showing a new form of what a new form of governance can look like. And around the country, we're seeing more folks who might have started with a cradle to career approach, a lot of core educational moves, open up the tent a bit to think in an interdisciplinary fashion. They're looping in housing, mental health services, expanding what cradle to career itself really means. Could you say more about why and how this is happening? You all embody this evolution, so I'd love for you to reflect on that. And I'll just say as a quick note, we were grateful last week to be in MEDA. I had the chance to be there on the ground with our friends from the Harlem Children's Zone, with superintendents from over 20 districts across the U.S., serving 1.4 million students, and MEDA was featured prominently on that visit. And so I think a lot of those district leaders were struck by this interdisciplinary approach that leverages education, but is not just about education. So I'd love for you to reflect on that for a moment.
Yeah, I'll start, and I think Jillian and Luis could even go deeper on this, but I think what makes us a kind of unusual Cradle to Career initiative is that we combined the Cradle to Career approach with a broader community development effort, including affordable housing, as was mentioned earlier, not only connecting families to affordable housing, but developing new affordable housing ourselves, working with families to preserve existing affordable housing in the community to avoid displacement, but also combining that with small business lending, especially along our commercial corridors, to keep our cultural district intact. So it's that kind of holistic approach that I think is unusual for a Cradle to Career initiative, but has been extremely powerful and rewarding in our experience. I want to credit that move that we made to what we were hearing from our community, as was said earlier by Lynn. We met with families early on in our Promise Neighborhood initiative, and housing came up again and again as one of the primary barriers for academic success for their children. And we, in addition to that, we could just see the displacement happening around us. So that moved us in that direction. The other thing I'll say that probably led us to that kind of holistic community development approach was that we started off as an asset building organization long before we ever got the Promise Neighborhood Grant. Long before we ever got into Cradle to Career, we were helping small businesses get started. We were providing technical assistance to existing small businesses. So that's just kind of in the DNA of the org, and just bringing those all together helped us create this holistic approach. In terms of new governance structures, I think that what we saw is all this infrastructure that we built to get to academic outcomes, to improved academic outcomes, was actually bigger than bigger than just education. And an example of that is when the pandemic hit, the city called us to say, look, we need to get emergency resources to a lot of families that are off the grid because for whatever reason, they may be undocumented, they may not be comfortable talking to government agencies. We need to get emergency resources out to them related to income, to housing, to health. And they knew that all of this infrastructure that we'd built with the school sites, with the families at the school sites, with the network of community partners that we were working with, they knew that we had the infrastructure to get information and resources to these families quickly. And to me, that is a new form of governance. It's a new form of government. To me, it's government that is closer to the people, that is more collaborative and more accountable to results.
Thanks for that, Richard. Luis, would love to get you back in the conversation and pivot a bit. So when we first shared the case with you, you said you wanted to share your favorite mistakes as well as successes. Obviously, seeing the work of MEDA now, it's so unbelievable. I think for a lot of us, it's like, wow, breathtaking. How did this ever come to be? But, we really appreciated you wanting to just talk about, the ebbs and flows in the journey. And so what are some of the favorite mistakes you'd call out, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think as Richard and Jillian can share with you, we've done our share of mistakes. And I think a lot of it came from our lack of experience in doing this collective impact. I think we were pretty naive as to what it took to develop this kind of collective impact initiative. One of the things that we fully underestimated was the complexity of being a backbone organization, combining it with affordable housing development work, to be a lender, to also include policy and advocacy in all this work. It was in addition to doing the work itself, it was all the risk management that comes with it. And I think that is something that I still think about regularly, actually daily. So a second example of favorite mistakes is underestimating the level of initial political resistance to implementing this strategy. We have had some very serious political conversations with our elected officials, with administrators, and navigating through all of that to get to where we are right now. I think I did not expect that kind of level of resistance, but obviously we have dealt with it, and we formed partnerships with those individuals who initially were a little resistant to what we were doing. Let me just share a couple of challenges or successes that I think are important for people to hear. I think like the audacity again to create a collective impact initiative that sought to enhance academic achievement of children, while at the same time working with parents to improve their family economic success. That was, I think, the right combination for us. And it remains true to now, but it was a very heavy lift. So having done it, I feel very, very great about it. I think the ability to leverage our initial premise of academic achievement and layering it with affordable housing services and development, integrating small business into the means as a means of creating job opportunities for our school families was critical. So we were not only working directly with academic achievement, but we wanted to make sure that those children had a stable place to live and that those parents had enough income to support their family. So that was, I think, really critical. And as Richard said, that became very apparent during the pandemic when our families were in crisis. I think the ability to showcase our place-based work in the Mission District as an example of what can be done to stabilize a community that had been in crisis due to displacement for the prior 15 years. Things are better now, I'm happy to say. And at the same time, taking the next step and figuring out how this model, some of the strategies, can be applied to other communities nationally, and helping those other communities develop the capacity to do similar work in their communities that they want to do, that is tailored to their own community. I think the whole idea of really looking at the place-based work here in the Mission and figure out what elements are relevant to other communities is really, really important. And I think that could actually change the sector, not just the Mission. So those are the things that I have for you, Rob.
Thanks so much, Luis. I'm going to go to Jillian, but before I go to Jillian, if folks want to start putting their questions in the chat, we're going to open up for moderated discussion with Q&A in a second. So feel free to put your questions in the chat and or raise your hand, and using the raise your hand function, and we'll call on you in a moment. But just a last question here before we open it up. Jillian, we know that MEDA has been increasingly focused on policy at the federal, state, and local level. You have a really robust approach to policy work. And can you share a bit about why you see that as essential and what some of MEDA's top policy priorities are?
Yes, absolutely. So we saw the effectiveness of this approach here in the Mission, and we first came together with our California Promise Neighborhood peers around 2017 and decided to form the California Promise Neighborhood Network. I will say that I've had the opportunity to see these promise neighborhoods in action throughout the state of California and other parts of the country. And everywhere that we've seen it, it's been equally amazing and equally transformative for that community. And it looks different everywhere. So we've taken it on as one of our top policy agenda items. CPNN introduced a couple of bills back then, and unfortunately we weren't successful in getting those passed. But in around 2020, we joined forces with the Strive Together communities and formed the End Child Poverty Coalition with Grace leading on that. We were able to successfully secure $12 million through a state appropriation around 2022. And so we're now working with the state of California to institutionalize this program, to find additional funding, to make a permanent Promise Neighborhood program, Cradle-to-Career program within the state of California. So we've seen the effectiveness, we believe in it, we want permanent funding. We know that these communities need and deserve permanent funding for this work. At the same time, we saw how transformative the federal grant was and everything it started for us and all of our peers. So about a year and a half ago, we came together with 3 other Promise neighborhoods throughout the country, SBCS and Partners for Rural Impact, Delta Health Alliance, along with Save the Children and the William Julius Wilson Institute. And most recently, Omega CDC joined us, and we formed the National Promise Neighborhoods Coalition. So with that coalition, we have 2 very specific purposes. One is increasing funding for Promise neighborhoods. We want more of this, right? And then 2 is extending the funding. So creating a long-term federal funding stream for this work. As Richard mentioned, when he came on board, we were facing a funding cliff. that happens to communities implementing this work all the time. We know that for us, our core direct service programs at MEDA count on long-term multi-year government funding. And so we are trying to make the case that this program also needs and deserves that to be that backbone organization in a community.
Thanks so much for that, Jillian. So we have a question here. Robert Fisher, good to see you, Robert, incoming doctoral student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and does a lot of place-based work. The question here is, what technical competencies and skills did the MEDA team need to be effective across promised neighborhood implementation, grant reporting, traditional economic community development, for example, tax incentives, TIFs, and state local policy analysis implementation? Anyone want to take that on first?
Yeah, I could start.
Sorry for the very doctoral student question.
One skill that was game-changing for us is, as Richard mentioned, results-based accountability. When we started this work, we really didn't have a roadmap about how to implement it, and the Casey Foundation, along with several other partners, invested in providing that training for us, and it really changed our ability to implement, because results-based accountability, results-based facilitation gives you a toolkit for how you do collective impact work, how you measure collective impact work. So I think that came to mind for me as one of the really core skills that helped our team advance along the way. We took it further, integrated it across the whole organization, built a results-based accountability strategic plan. We have a certified RBA trainer in-house who trains all of our new staff. So it's been really core to our ability to keep doing this work. Luis, I don't know if you want to share anything else.
No, I'm good, Jen. Thank you for that.
Thanks for that. Other questions from the audience here? And while we're waiting, I'll just ask if one of you could say a little bit more about the family success coach part of the work the promotoras. How do you all really personalize supports for young people and families in the Mission District? And then how are you connecting that to the broader set of partners that you work with, if one of you wants to take that question?
Okay, I can take it again. Yeah, so our family success coaches are service coordinators. They work in the schools and early learning centers, and they just really connect with the community at the school. So they do intakes with families, they do a holistic comprehensive needs assessment, and then their job is to make sure that family is getting the supports, creating a plan for whatever their goals are. And those goals can range, they could be financial goals, they could be college goals, they could be work and job. So they help the family develop a plan, and then they connect them to all the available resources in our community, which are many. We have a lot we provide at MEDA. We have a lot of partners who provide amazing services. And so it's really that sort of like one-on-one navigating and making sure they can connect. And then as far as our promotoras are doing very widespread community outreach. So that's the trusted messenger model. They are community members who are deeply connected. They do outreach through showing up at events, flyering. There was even some door knocking happening at times, and just really getting the message out about whatever services or campaigns we're working on at the time. They also do basic levels of intake and basic levels of services as well. So some examples of things they've worked on with us have been below market rate housing applications, and just when these units come online, just saturating information and resources to help families apply for those. During the pandemic, they took on a widespread vaccine outreach campaign. So they were trying to make sure we got the word out everywhere about vaccines, getting vaccinated, where you can get vaccinated, COVID information. We were able to increase the vaccination rate in our community to 89%. So those are some examples of how they work. And they've actually formalized a cooperative. So we have, it's called Promotoras Activas SF, which is a worker-owner cooperative.
Thanks so much for that, Jillian. Richard, we're going to go to you with the question from Larry, just about governance structures, What's the vision going forward? Is another possibility to change existing public institutions? Richard, you've thought a lot and talked a lot about, what you think the future of this is from an institutional arrangement point of view. And I'd love for you to maybe use Promise City here as a tee up to respond to Larry. And then after that, we'll take another question there I see from Elena, and we'll go to Luis on that one. But we'll go to you first, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, so this initiative has been so successful in our neighborhood that we have agreed with the city to expand the approach into multiple neighborhoods in San Francisco. All previously redlined neighborhoods like our neighborhood, all communities of color, all communities with disparities regarding health and income. So we're calling this moving from a Promise neighborhood to a Promise City. As we move beyond the footprint of our neighborhood, we have to think about what sort of cross-sector entity is going to manage this work. So the way it's managed at our neighborhood level is that we have a community collaborative made up of 15 different community-based organizations and the school district and the city. The leadership from those partners gets together on a regular basis. We call it the advisory board to guide the work. But once we go into multiple neighborhoods, we're talking about systems now. And so we're kind of moving towards potentially a children's cabinet type of entity to kind of guide this work. I know other communities have children's cabinets. Some communities have joint powers authorities where they bring the different governmental entities together with formal agreements to collaborate. But all that to say that I think it may look slightly different in every community, but we're sort of moving in that direction towards some sort of cross-sector table that where the city, the school district, the county, we're city-county combined, and the community partners all sit together to kind of guide the effort. I do think, Larry, this is a great question because there are going to have to be changes to the way government works as we go down this road. One thing that we've learned is that the way traditional RFPs are set up from our city and county, they are set up in a siloed way where very often our partners who are collaborating together have to compete against each other for the traditional grants that the city and county provide. So we envision that at some point, our local government will have to redo the way it releases RFPs so that it's looking at work more holistically and funding collaboration more so than siloed work. I think the last thing I'll say about that is that I think we're also starting to envision a time when government is also just organized a little less siloed and a little more holistically at the organizational level.
Thanks for that, Richard. And we're going to go to Melena's question around partnering with organizations and entities outside of the Promise Neighborhoods Network as a means of expanding the model's reach and impact. I was wondering, Luis, if you might say a word about that. I know you're in a lot of different networks and partnerships. So how do you see partnership outside of the Promise Neighborhood universe, given all the other things that MEDA does as an organization?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that we're very much leveraging our work in the various Promise Neighborhoods networks that we're a part of, but we're taking those that work with those networks and bringing it to other networks. For instance, Richard is on the Strive Together board, so he's bringing this work to that set of organizations. I sit on the Unidos US Board of Directors, and this work that we're talking about here is showing up with Unidos US. It is also showing up with the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders, where I'm also on the board. So this work is not just for the mission. It is actually, we see it that it's applicable to other organizations who are part of other networks. We're just starting to do work with the California Racial Equity Lending Collaborative. And this work, and with that network, we're starting with the business side of it, and we hope to bring other components of the model into that network as well. And we're in the early stages of that. And I'll just say, Rob, that part of what we have a set of team members whose job is to engage with these networks nationally to bring the model forward. So, I see that it's all our responsibilities at MEDA to share the model, but we have specific people who are helping us project manage and coordinate through those networks. So actively seeking speaking engagement, actively seeking attendance at conferences, et cetera, with the purpose of sharing the impact of this model.
Thanks for that, Luis. Well, we're coming up on time, so I'm going to tee up a closing question and then ask each panelist, in addition to that, to offer some closing remarks. So I'm going to start with you, Jillian, and then we'll go to Richard and then Luis. Just would love to hear any advice you have for a community that's in the early stages of trying to develop a place-based prenatal to career strategy. What advice do you have to those who are early upstarts in this? And then also, what's giving you hope around this work and around our field moving forward? So we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Richard and Luis.
Yeah, advice for early stages, I would say just, don't give up, keep at it. I think some of the early stages can be the most difficult stages, and forming those partnerships, figuring everything out, lining up funding. Sometimes it can take a while to get traction, but this is long-term work. This is intergenerational work. We're here in our communities, and this is what we're doing. So I think just that tenacity and that ability to stick it out and keep at it will definitely pay off. As far as what's giving me hope, so much, so much. There's been so much interest in this work that seems to just be growing, and I think more things are clicking together with understanding that economic development, housing, and cradle to career don't have to be separate. That's coming from the national funder community, national thought leaders like you all. So that is extremely exciting to me. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing where it all goes and being part of that.
Thanks, Jillian. And then we'll go to Richard.
Yeah, I think finding that kind of cross-sector interest for cross-sector stakeholders to be at the table. And I guess to put it in a different way, this work is about tackling problems that no single agency can solve on its own, that no school district can solve on its own. And so when we can all agree on that across sectors and come to a common table to start finding solutions together, I think that's where you start to find the magic, the power of this work. So that would be one of the key ingredients, is getting that sort of acknowledgement of the need for the cross-sector approach to tackle the biggest problems we're facing as a community and even a society. I think the second thing is that, again, a structured process for actually doing this work, a commitment to implementing what I think it should be a results-based accountability process. I'm sure there are other collective impact guiding processes, but I've seen RBA work, so I would stick with that. And then the last thing I'll say around what gives me hope is that we've seen the results. We have the proof of concept in our very own neighborhood. We've seen what happens when people come together, when we see each other, when we commit to helping those of us who are most in need. We've seen the transformative changes, and it can be done.
Thanks, Richard. And Luis?
Yeah, I would just say, start off, just decide to do it and get engaged in that. I think that was the first thing. Commit to doing it. I think is really important. I think the other thing is look at what you have. What are the resources that you currently have available, and make sure that you leverage those, because you're then starting from a position of strength to do additional work. The other thing that I would say is identify your champions within your staff, within your partners, within government, that are going to lead on specific issues that you may not be so strong on, but they can help you, and then figure out how what you can do to support them. How do you support that leadership that they want to share with you through the initiative that you're creating? I think what gives me hope, I think like Richard said, and I think Jillian shared as well, is that we know that this approach works and we have the results. I think that's really important. I think the other thing that I'm seeing is an increased conversation and excitement about this movement around this work. And then honestly, the other thing that really excites me, and I think particularly here with MEDA, but I can see with other communities, is this is what racial equity looks like. You know, you create the infrastructure to do the things that we all want to do as it relates to racial equity. So I think defining this work in that way, I think for me is actually really hopeful.
Thanks for that, Luis. So let's give a virtual round of applause for Luis, Jillian, and Richard and Lynn for an amazing session. Much gratitude to our friends at MEDA for your morally ambitious, audacious work. It's been one of the great gifts of my life to get to know you, to be in partnership with you. I know on behalf of the entire EdRedesign team that we are so grateful for the opportunity to walk alongside you and to share your work with so many across the country. So thankful for you all being a beacon of hope in these complicated times. And we're really excited to be in the Mission District with you again very soon. I did want to just thank our audience for joining today from across the country. And also note that if you're interested in these series and webinar discussions, we have one more next week on Tuesday, May 14th from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern with the Director of AmeriCorps State and National, Sonali Nijawin, our By All Means Senior Fellows Cross-Sector Leadership Series, Reimagining Cradle-to-Career Solutions Through Service. So thanks again, everyone, for being here today. Thanks again to our friends from MEDA, and we'll see you all soon. Nos vemos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.